right. We've made a decision here. The planning team is going to use the handheld mic for our presentation. So that's the first decision of the night. It was easy. And we got it done. Thanks everybody for coming. My name is Paul Lippens. I'm Vice President with McKenna. McKenna is a planning and urban design firm, and we work all around the Midwest. It's our pleasure to be here in Zionsville tonight and to be talking to you about the zoning code. By show of hands, how many people are from Perry Township? All right. Well, the reason why we came out to Perry Township is because we wanted to have something central that residents of Perry could come out to. But are there other folks, people from the Eagle Township area here or Union? All right. Well, thank you for coming here. That's also why we're doing multiple events this week, to make sure that we give people multiple opportunities to come. If you look around at some of the posters here, we have the word charrette. We're using the word charrette. Has anybody heard the word charrette before? One person, two people. All right. So it's this is planner jargon. It's sometimes called plannerese, but it's a fun term. Maybe Adam, do you want to give the example? You do it better than me. You want to do it now? Let's do it.
All right. Good evening, everyone. And just what's up? Yeah. Just by way of convenience, I'm Adam Cook. I'm also a consultant planner with McKenna. And I'll tell you the story really quickly. Charrette is a French word, and it actually means little cart. So it's like imagine a little push cart. And basically what happened was back in the late 1800s, early 1900s in the Beaux-Arts Academy over in Paris, they would have these, design projects that the design and architecture students would work on all day and all night, right, at the end of a term or a semester for hours, to the point where a docent would come around and, with this little push cart, right, collect all of these blueprints, all of these drawings would be taken in and be graded by the professors. And there was a famous etching or a drawing made of all the students walking alongside this push cart, right, up until the very last minute, making final changes and corrections to their work. And so that term has kind of evolved to where a team such as my colleagues and I come into a community and actually sort of take residence for, in this case, a week, so that we're here constantly, 24/7, interacting with you, interacting with town staff, interacting with all of the people that make Zionsville what it is and make it work. And then we're back in our studio. We've packed everything up and set up an office over at the Brick Street Inn that's going to be there every day for a week. And so when we're not interacting with you, we're back feverishly working on what's going to become sort of the bones, the very first rough draft of the Zionsville Town Code. And all of your feedback at tonight's event and the subsequent events is going to be sort of looped in as we progress every day. And that's going to get taken into account. So, Paul, I kind of stole your thunder. Just went off. But
no, that's good. This is just framework for what we're doing tonight. That's why we call it a listening session. We're here to listen to you, right? And every day we're going to hear from residents and work on incorporating what we hear into candidate recommendations that, as Adam said, will form kind of a bones or first draft of the ordinance. Then we'll continue working with the Zionsville administration to finalize that document. And when we have a draft, we'll take that back out to the public for feedback. So you're here right at the ground floor, helping us form our impressions and understand what the issues are that we want to solve, and also what needs to be preserved. What are the great things about this community that we want to bring into the future that will become the future for the town? So quickly, my colleague Chris Corey and Mike Campbell are also from the McKenna team. We've got Owen and Zach here tonight from the town of Zionsville, and we'd like to thank the gracious fire department staff at Perry Township for having us hosting here tonight. Thank you, Chief. Appreciate it. All right. So what we're working on is kind of a reorganized zoning ordinance. Has anybody had any experience with zoning ordinances? Have you read the zoning ordinance? Have you looked at it, even just from your own perspective, to understand where your house is? We've got a little bit of familiarity with zoning. Zoning tends to be kind of the least fun of all the planning exercises because what we're actually working on is regulations. So we still want to be forward thinking. We want to think about the future, but we also know that the impacts of the decisions we make in this code will have an immediate effect when it's adopted. So we're actually trying to create a code that will affect the immediate development. So at McKenna, we work really a lot on the urban edge. So communities like Zionsville is really where we thrive. We work in growing communities, but also communities that are interested in preserving the character of the place, so that as communities grow, what is really important and sacred, what makes that community a special place, is preserved in the future. And this image here kind of talks a little bit about what that is. As you go from the center of the city, the center of Indianapolis, out into the rural areas, there are a lot of different types of developments that exist in this region. And all of these really exist in Zionsville. And we want to understand and code how those different places work in the community. I like to show this picture here. This is the Dicksboro General Store. So I actually grew up in a small village of Dicksboro, which is outside Ann Arbor, Michigan. And this is the village general store. That's when I was a kid, I would play baseball right across from this. And what it shows really is that in rural areas or hamlets, there really is good urbanism. So what makes a good general store? You have one right out here. It might not be functional now, but it could. But you want the windows to be able to see the retail space. You want it to be at the road edge so you can see the place. You want good signage. And these types of general stores have all the character of urbanism. And even looking here, this is another corner I lived on in New York City when I was in college, or after college actually. But this is First Avenue, and this is a general store in that area. And you can see that even though these places are very different, the other thing I didn't point out is it's a traffic signal or a stop sign. That this type of urbanism is located in a place where people can access it, right? Where do you drive your car? You want to go to the store? There's a lot of similarities, even though you don't think about these places necessarily as being the same. So you've got the store, you've got the traffic light, you've got multiple stories, you've got transparent ground floors, openings. What we observe of being quality places to visit, these things can actually be coded into a zoning code. So that's part of what we'll look to do this week, is to understand what the best places are in this community, the precedents that we would look to form architectural regulations. So new developments that come in will match and be consistent with the community character. And in looking at that, we'll look at things like signing, window placement, the types of architectural details that the community wants to recreate, and the types of places. So we know that a hamlet or the types of stores that you want here in Perry might not be the same as other places around the township. We want to learn a little bit about that as well. So as we examine the community this week and look for these precedents, as we create the zoning code, we'll try to take those precedents and create standards. And those standards will be the standards that new development will be required to implement. The other thing that we'll be looking for, and this is kind of what the big map in the back is about, is where the places might be neighborhood centers, districts, where the key corridors are, and which places might be more fit for new development, which places might be more fit for preservation. And I think some of my colleagues will get into this a little bit more, but one of the things that I say about planning and about zoning is that if you like the place you live, the worst thing you can do is nothing. Because if you do nothing, you can be sure something's going to happen, and it's going to be what you didn't plan for. So what we want to get right is what you want to happen. And then by coding it, we can make sure that when development comes, it will go to the places you intend it to be, and it will be of the quality that you intend it to be. So a little bit of what we'll be going through, creating concept plans, creating regulating plans. So even within a district, you might want to say, only this corner is a place where we might want retail. The rest of it, we would be okay with some housing or neighborhood uses. But we can actually do that through the zoning map and then through district regulating plans that go into a little bit more specific details. And in doing so, We'll help define the place, the region, where those districts are, where the neighborhoods are, where the agricultural areas are to be preserved, and then how the corridors in the region should flow. And we do this according also to many town plans, and you'll see on the table back here, we actually have printed out what the existing codes are, what some of the existing plans are, and you can flip through those tonight too and get impressions of those documents. So when we talk about a form-based code, one of the things that a form-based code does is it takes some of those design standards and precedents and puts them into pictures, puts them into things that are easy to understand. So the idea is that then they're more likely to get built as intended. What we want to do is demystify a little bit of the zoning process to make it more easy to implement and more transparent. And in that way, we can create codes that actually make spaces for people and where they work and they shop and they play. Form-based coding is a little different than conventional coding. So the existing zoning code in Zionsville, we would call that a conventional zoning code, and it's really designed to create districts and uses and control what uses they can be. Conventional zoning codes do control form. They have setbacks in them. They have massing requirements, lot requirements. But if you don't speak the zoning language, it can be sometimes difficult to understand what that means on the ground. In creating a form-based code, what we want to do is create a little bit more easy to understand what those conventional standards mean. And we also will take a lot of those existing standards, dimensions, and we'll take those and put them into tables, right? It's a lot easier to understand information when it's in a table. You don't have to sift through 200 pages of document to find one standard. We'll take those and put them into tables so that it's easier to understand what codes and standards apply to which properties. Another part of the form-based code, as I mentioned, was the regulating plan. Form-based codes tend to use a little different color scheme. So you'll see over here we've got a series of maps, and they're really designed with conventional color schemes. You'll see yellow for residential and red for commercial, more separation of uses, sometimes gray or purple for an industrial area. A form-based code or regulating plan is designed to think more about the transition from the center of a district to the edge of a district. And for instance, in a neighborhood, you probably do have a general store, and it probably is permitted in your residential neighborhood. But a form-based code is designed to kind of show that transition of space and uses from a center of a district to the edge. The other thing that form-based codes do is they allow you to regulate buildings by story. So if you see the image on the top here, this is something that typically you don't get in a conventional zoning code. You don't usually get a code that says on the first floor you must have retail or office. You must have a public or quasi-public use. And then on the second floor you may have office. On the third floor you must have residential. And this is why in some communities you get vacant second stories, vacant third stories, because you don't have a vertical zoning integrated into the code. The other thing that they do is rather than have a setback, so you must build back 10 feet, they have a build to line that actually says you must build at 10 feet, which is a little bit different, but what that does is it creates a street wall and it creates a consistency in how buildings go up, which is something you'll observe in a lot of places that actually create very nice design and character flow. You'll see this image on the right shows that, and we're going to talk a little bit more about that image in a little bit. And I already mentioned architectural regulations. Form-based codes also can do things. These are things that are not present in every code, but one thing that you can do is you can regulate the street types and the connections. You can also spend a good amount of time streamlining development processes. So for instance, if you meet every objective, every requirement in the zoning code, you might go through a simpler development process. And what that does is it incentivizes people complying with the code and building what residents want to be built. You can also require that developments match a specific predetermined concept. So for instance, if there was a master plan or a community area plan that residents really liked, in a zoning code, you can require compliance with that predetermined concept. So this is the overall process, and this is one of the reasons why I wanted to talk about this tonight too, so everyone realizes we are very much at the beginning of this process. So you are here to help us understand the community and help us understand what the community's needs are. After this, we'll work on, as I mentioned, drafting the code. We'll solicit more technical feedback from people that will be using the code and residents as well. We'll issue a final draft, and then prior to adoption, there'll be a series of public hearings, and then the town actually adopts the plan. I think the other important, or the code, the other important thing to realize about this process is it's cyclical. So even once the code is adopted by the town, there's still review and update, and you can amend it. So nothing that we do as this process is put in place forever. In fact, we're actually working on revising the existing zoning ordinance and making it better. So that's a little bit of introduction into what we're doing, what the purpose of our week here. But I'm going to hand it now over to my colleague Adam, who's going to talk a little bit about the history of the Zionsville area and essentially the code that we're looking to update.
Thank you, Paul. And thanks again, everybody. I just want to spend a few minutes on a little food for thought. This is the fun part of the presentation. We can maybe take a little bit of a trip back in time and think about sort of the past connecting to the present, connecting to the future. This is just one stop, sort of on a long chain, right? Perry Township and Zionsville. This is a community that's been handed down to us collectively, and we're the guardians of it, we're the gatekeepers of it for the present. But the changes that are made with zoning or planning or anything that's developed in sort of a civic process, right, is a decision that's made for future generations, right? The next 1, 2, even 3 generations will be impacted, right? Just as you're impacted now by decisions that were made in some cases 50 or 60 or 70 years ago. But so let's go way back. Let's go way back to 1850, 1860, 1870 for a second, and just take a look at what that looked like. Of course, we didn't have satellite photos. This was as close to Google Maps as we got with these great township plat books, And this is the 1878 Boone or county plat books. This is the 1878 Boone County plat book. And as we can see, we've got Zionsville and the remnants of Eagle Village, which was there prior to Zionsville. And then we move west into Perry Township. You can see right there by the 1878 label, you can see the Fayette label, which is exactly where we are right now. And you can also see some of the other settlements that dotted the area that's present-day town of Zionsville, such as a place called Northfield. Of course, Whitestown, which is in their own zoning jurisdiction, but right there in the middle. And otherwise, you can see those numbered sections are square mile sections per the Jeffersonian Public Land Survey. That's why we Midwesterners, think in squares and square miles. This was, of course, a predominantly agricultural area with no other sort of major town settlement until you got to Lebanon, to the north. And then, of course, Indianapolis wasn't the metropolis that it is today. So sort of Zionsville, Whitestown was kind of the midway point on that rail line between Lebanon and Indy. When we think about land use regulations, now granted, I'm looking in this table at just what's now sort of the village area, the historic area of Zionsville. But just to give you a sense of, is this sort of a new thing? We talk about a form-based code, we're talking about zoning. Actually, regulating land use goes back a long, long way. And townships and towns and villages were passing individual land use ordinances all the way back to their founding. So in 1881, the village of Zionsville passed its first land use ordinance, and that was abolishing the slaughtering of any animal on any property. You move to the 1920s when the automobile, brand new technology, right, became commonly used, and gas stations started popping up. So the first permit was issued in 1923 for Zionsville's first oil filling station there on Main Street. And in 1941, they prepared their first zoning ordinance. And forgive me, I'm not positive when Perry Township or Boone County first zoned this area. I would imagine it was a little bit later. Typically, that started happening in Indiana more into the 1950s, 60s, and even 70s in these rural areas. You can see some other milestones for the village there on that slide. Going back to sort of 1850s, 1860s, the railroad era, you can see how the actual village of Zionsville was created around the railroad and as a sort of investment property as a railroad stop. I'm going to skip over a lot of the material that talks about the town since we have such an overwhelming Perry Township audience, and make sure that what we talk about is applicable. At the same time, the development of this entire area of southern Boone County was influenced either way by transportation technology. So first the railroads, the long distance passenger and freight railroads going from Indy to Chicago. Later on, the interurban lines, right? Those spurred development. And then that development created demand in the outlying areas for goods and services and agricultural products and things like that. So everything is still tied together during these early years. Of course, we get more to the automobile era after the interurban lines and the rail lines as a means of everyday personal transportation got replaced by the automobile. Now we're starting to see high-speed, long-distance interstates come into the region. Okay, Interstate 465, Interstate 74, Interstate 75, or Interstate 74, pardon me. And what that did for land use patterns in a lot of areas was create the suburban pattern, which was in contrast to in a small hamlet or in a village like Zionsville, which has its walkable main street with a mix of uses. We started creating properties that were designed for people in their cars. So this is Boone Village Shopping Center. Further out towards Perry, of course, we see much newer, much larger examples of this, especially along Whitestown Parkway. But the concept is the same. It's designed predominantly for people arriving by private motor vehicle. And in the case of Boone Village, if you're a deer, you can shop at that Kroger as well. I happened to see that on the news last year. I think that deer was probably buying toilet paper like everybody else. So if we look at the actual overall land use pattern, getting good aerial photos prior to the 50s is always a little tricky, especially in Boone County. I couldn't get any from the 1930s, even though they were taken. But if we go back to 1955, and it's a little difficult to see when we're looking at an old black and white photograph, but you can generally see the pattern. The village of Zionsville is in the lower right-hand corner, and pretty much everything else is open agriculture. And if you zoom in, you can see the beginnings of a few individual homesteads where larger parcels have been split off, to create sort of a large lot residential, especially as you move out directly to the west or the left of that photograph along Oak Street. And so just due to the extent of the aerial photos and being able to actually fit everything on one slide in a way that's visible, unfortunately, we don't go all the way as far west as Perry Township, but these patterns are common to Perry and Worth Township and Union Township and Eagle Township as well. And so this is the fun thing to do. So we'll go back and forth. This is the exact same extent from 55 to 81, so about 25 years. And then we can see in those 25 years closer into the village what's happened in Eagle Township. You can see the very beginnings of that sort of more than just splitting off of individual homesteads, but actual planned residential neighborhoods, what we might call suburban cul-de-sac neighborhoods, taking place there by the early 1980s. If I move forward another 15, 20 or so years, now we get to 2005. And again, those planned neighborhoods really pop out on an aerial photograph. So you can see the ones that were new, you can see how that tissue has grown and grown between 81 and 05. And even in the areas that didn't get developed this way, you can again see the splitting off of smaller parcels from those larger agricultural parcels. And then I'm going to do one more, and I'm going to go up to 2019, 2020. This image came off of Google Earth, so it's the newest one. But you can again see that there's yet another sort of tranche of that type of suburban auto-oriented type of development, especially if you look at the lower left-hand corner. So I'm going to go from 2005 to 2020. Now that's Whitestown's zoning jurisdiction, but you can see all of that development springing up along Whitestown Parkway there, along with some additional neighborhoods closer into the village. And yet still, as you follow the rail trail, which, obviously now a trail was one side of Bill's main rail line, out towards the upper left-hand corner, okay, you can see a lot more of that still active agricultural land. And so when we get into what we call the reorganization era, this is the Perry and Union and Eagle and the original village of Zionsville coming together for planning and zoning and other governmental activities. That's sort of 2000 to the present. And these are just on the ground examples that we've gone around and looked at and surveyed. These were all built under different iterations of different zoning codes, and in some cases, multiple zoning codes that were enacted at different times since they're in different townships. But you can see that this process, again, on the ground from the 1970s to the 2000s is continuing at a pretty rapid pace the further east you go across Interstate 65. And I'm going to cut through some of the material related to historic preservation in the village, but I want to get over here to Fayette. And again, this is obviously right outside of where we are right now. Something that stuck in my mind from Paul's earlier comments when Paul's talking about vertical zoning. This isn't necessarily the right example, but this building right to our south that was once a general store, I find that to be a very fascinating building. That's the type of place that was permitted before the sort of modern, separate, single-use zoning that began dominating in the 50s, 60s, 70s. That's the kind of place where most likely somebody had a small storefront in the front. Maybe it was all on one floor, but they lived in the back. These types of places were fairly common, especially in rural areas where the economics weren't there to necessarily dictate, let's go to the expensive building, a fancy single-use building just for one store. Small proprietors can serve the hyper-local markets and tailor their goods to the residents' individual needs at a relatively low cost, right? Because they're using basically the business revenue to pay off the mortgage on what's otherwise going to be their house. It's a very sustainable model. And prior to sort of the mid 20th century sort of planning that took over, people were allowed to do more flexible projects such as that. And so we've got some big questions that we're looking to you for answers on this week. And one of those big questions is you've got sort of what's known as urban zoning and rural zoning, and that's because the rural districts were inherited from the township and the county zoning. And what's now called urban zoning was the legacy zoning for those areas that the village or the town of Zionsville, right there in the village center, had annexed. And we've been doing a lot of work sorting that out mentally, and it's a head scratcher for those of us who've been in the business for many years. So we understand it's a head scratcher for you, but the long and short of it is, we have that boundary defined on a map? And what does that urban-rural boundary really mean? Is that something that carries forward and actually has meaning beyond simply a different family of conventional zoning districts, which is what it means now. As Chris was going to demonstrate in just a few minutes, there are a lot of duplicative districts that are called, for example, rural R1 versus urban R1. But what does that boundary mean? Maybe even more in a philosophical context for the town, for the region. Where does that rural character get preserved? And again, like Paul said, where does that development take place? And so, of course, how can zoning then be used as a tool to help us achieve that vision? In one instance, we've got Stonegate. Stonegate is an example of what some might call a new urban community or a new urbanist community, where they did build, instead of more of a cul-de-sac, auto-oriented suburb, they made a great attempt at a place where you could move in, you could meet your daily needs there without an automobile. Unfortunately, those don't always work out as well as planned. In this case, they have a beautiful town square. They have a beautiful main street that they've built. I don't know if anybody's gone in there and explored, but the commercial properties aren't doing so well. The reason they're not doing so well is because they are internal to this neighborhood. So to actually get to a restaurant or a little store in there, somebody that doesn't live in the neighborhood, right, would have to know it's there and drive from a main road all the way through that town grid and get to the town center. Those places are very hard to get rooted and really get quality commercial to develop for the reason that they just don't have enough eyeballs. The number of houses that are built immediately surrounding them can't support by themselves a restaurant or quality retail store. They need that through traffic, that pass-through traffic to support them as well. I also want to look at what's going on, in some of your neighboring jurisdictions. So you can see Whitestown on the left, and you can see Westfield on the right. And these are two areas, again, that are out of our zoning district. But at the same time, they're making some choices that are rapidly changing the character of areas that were once predominantly open land and agricultural. And so our decisions have to be made in the context of kind of these moving chess pieces. And there's others. There's Hendricks County. There's Brownsburg. The Indy region to the north, to the west, and of course to the east are growing. There's a lot of demand. And Zionsville is a sort of a key link in that chain of jurisdictions. And so this is really the right time for this effort and an exciting time because the decisions that get made in this process really will have a tangible impact, a positive impact for your children, your grandchildren, the next several generations. And so I should have given that pep talk on that slide because what is the coming era? Again, that's what we hope to find out and what we're eager to have your help and your input on. So I'm going to hand things over to my colleague Mike, and he'll talk through the next portion.
Hi, my name is Mike Campbell. I'm the architect on the consultant team. My role here is going to be helping you establish your consensus vision for the rural areas of Zionsville, including Eagle, Perry, and Union Townships. You can see, Eagle Township is the area. Oh, I didn't give you guys the pointer. You have the pointer. Forgot to share.
It's okay, it makes you look more like an architect.
And it's not working, right? We had that. There we go. Eagle Township is this residential area between Whitestown and Zionsville. Of course, you're out here in Perry Township. The Union Township is the beige area to the north. The beige indicates agricultural zoning, incidentally. So rural areas like this conventionally are developed as large lot single-family subdivisions. This is an example. We're in a place where we worked at a few weeks ago, Van Buren Township, Michigan. And you can see in Van Buren with allowable 1 acre lots, it will mean that the site will likely be built out like as shown here. So if it's a 40 acre site, 40 acres means 40 lots, basically. And so that would be 40 single family homes. And that's pretty typical of suburban development and how it gets underway. And then it's followed by this, because services traditionally follow residential development. And then suddenly the area is no longer rural. So we build these large lots and we have these big setbacks for the houses, thinking we're going to keep things really green. I think that's the key word. We're going to have a lot of trees and grass. But that the intent is keeping it rural, but it doesn't end up that way. What we propose instead is a vision for new hamlets set within an existing rural landscape. And going back to the Van Buren example again, modified this time, not with 1 acre lots, but with 1 acre per lot, which is usually the zoning designation. The zoning designation usually doesn't ask you to have minimum 1 acre lots, but it'll tell you how many lots you can have per acre. So we prefer that, the latter, okay, and then to further concentrate those lots into one part of the site, make a maximum lot size of 0.2 acres or 66 by 132, if you will, and then preserve the agricultural land around it. And this creates what we call a hamlet. Here in Zionsville, where the agricultural land is allowed 1 residential unit per 2 acres, a 40 acre parcel yields 20 lots, so you have much more potential for agricultural preservation, creating hamlets here than you would have had here, twice the impact. So you can preserve a lot of open space. The other thing we're proposing is mixed-use developments or towns set within the same rural landscape. Towns like these can accommodate more than hamlets, including multifamily dwelling units and more mixed-use buildings or commercial development. A good example of that here on the right is the suburbs west of Stuttgart, Germany. This is a map from Germany. I actually superimposed the black box, 6 miles by 6 miles, or 36 square miles, which is the size of one township, U.S. township like Perry or Union. And you can see in Germany, they're able to fit up to 9 complete cities and still have mostly open space. They still have still preserve rural character in that amount of area. And you don't see that often. You don't see that in the United States. In addition to those 9 cities, they have multiple hamlets. You can see a smaller, like right there, right there, right there. So you have, in addition to all these small cities, you have the hamlets. And this is rural character. Unlike the suburbanization we see in most areas around the United States. That's true rural character, because rural areas are made up of small towns set in a serene rural landscape with numerous hamlets. You can find that pattern repeating across the country. This is an example of a town in the USA, Crested Butte, Colorado. I like to show this one because you can see the town and the rural landscape at one time. So it's a good image for telling that story. But also because the 2 buildings in the middle were developed according to a form-based code that was adopted in the late 1970s. And we're here to do a form-based code, so I thought it would be good to show you an example of that. And that particular code had extensive architectural regulations. So in order to achieve this pattern of development, the pattern being, small towns and hamlets set in a rural landscape, in a preserved rural landscape, we need to first identify locations for the town development and then reserve the remaining areas for hamlets. So these development locations need to be picked for their accessibility, for access to highways and interchanges, existing rooftops and existing rail lines. So you want to have access to highways and interchanges, but also for the retail component of these towns and villages, you want to have visibility and the traffic going by in order to make them, to contribute to their viability or make them viable. And so we have here, we have preliminarily, we've identified 4 locations for towns. Location number 1 is in Perry Township. It's located in the lower left. It's very close to the intersection of an existing rail line and Indiana 267, Indiana SR 267. Okay. Location number 2 is in Eagle Township. It's the only part of Eagle, one of the only parts of Eagle Township that fronts on a very heavily or highly developed segment of Whitestone Parkway near the I-65 interchange. So it's like a last opportunity there to do something right. The number 3 is US 421, and it was E300S, E300 South, East 300 South. And it's located at the confluence of several new large lot single family subdivisions. And the idea here would be if we created a town center at this location, the people living in those existing subdivisions would be able to walk or ride a bike into a village center instead of having to drive halfway across the township or the city. And the 4th location is at the intersection of 2 major highways and centrally located in Union Township. So once the locations have been selected, we need to write the code and code for them, and write the code portion of the code that applies to them. And stakeholders like you are called upon to identify precedents upon which these new developments are to be based. And normally, communities pick like an existing downtown or a nearby town, small town like either downtown Zionsville, or perhaps I would give the example of Nashville, Indiana. And once you guys have selected that precedent or agreed upon that precedent, our design team will go out and measure the sidewalks, measure the street, measure the building setbacks, the windows, the window openings, the heights of the buildings, the spacing of light fixtures, the spacing of trees, and try to write a code that, the result of which would be something that resembles that precedent. So this strategy will preserve rural character and manage growth. So at this point, we can ask you, we'll be here all week, so we can ask you this question now. You don't have to answer it right now, but can you identify a development pattern, a location, or a precedent to inform this discussion? And we're open to whatever you might have to say.
And we'll continue that discussion, I think, afterwards.
All right, they're making me run the anchor lag here. But what I want to talk about quickly before we break into the more open format of the meeting and starting with some individual discussions and putting sticky notes on boards and maps, etc. I'm sure we're going to talk about truck traffic, sounds like. I just want to talk a little bit about the current Zionsville zoning ordinance and sort of the process of taking what you have now, figuring out what you like about it, what's not working about it, and turning it into something new, fresh, and something that'll work in the 21st century. So what we're looking to do is enhance your existing reality, right? In this area, in Perry Township, we are looking at a rural community, right? And so the idea is, we're not here to set up zoning that brings in lots and lots of development. We want to create a zoning that works for you, that works for your rural character. Yeah.
Just move a little to your left.
Am I standing in front of the screen?
A little bit.
Okay, yeah, now everyone can see. We also need to make sure we understand the market, right? Nothing gets built if there's no market for it. So we need to make sure that we are zoning for something that is actually in demand in the market. This is an interesting example, but in the interest of time, I won't go into it right now. If anyone wants to talk about it later, we can. We also want to make sure we reflect local neighborhood goals. That means that zoning is drawn on a map in nuanced, small-scale areas, which is interesting given how large the geographic community we work in. We're working in here, but also understanding that we want to keep this code simple, and I'll get into that in a second. We also want to make sure that this is a democratic process, right? Zoning impacts property rights. If we're going to do that, we need to make sure that what we're doing is reflecting the community's goals for its future, right? And that means ensuring that these regulations are pursuing a specific goal. If there's something in the zoning ordinance, we can't figure out why it's there, then why are we enforcing it on property owners? So one thing we've done, and I want to walk over here, I'm going to go in front of the screen again, is this is your current zoning map. And everyone is invited after we finish talking to come look at this, because I think it's pretty interesting. But if you look at the legend over here in all the zoning districts, there are a lot of them. And that is partially because the urban and rural zoning ordinances were pushed together without really looking at where they overlapped back when the consolidation occurred. In order to, with a good goal, with a goal of making sure that nobody's zoning changed at that time. At this point, we want to make sure that we now have a code that is a little bit more usable, and we're not looking at redundancies, we're not looking at overlap, and that we're only zoning for things that are specifically moving us forward to our community goals. One of the things that we've done early in this process is take a look at these districts and make comparisons. Like, this is how many dwelling units can be built per acre in each of your residential zoning districts in the current zoning ordinance. You can see how many numbers are the same. That's the overlap that we're talking about, and what we want to make sure is not in the new code that we write. So we have kind of a suggestion how we consolidate all of those into just 6. And again, we can get into the details as we talk individually, and this is a very, very, very early draft. There's also quite a few commercial or mixed-use zoning districts in your current code. Some of them are very specific to offices. And how many of you are, over some point in the last 2 years, stopped working in an office for some period of time, right? So do we need as much office zoning? That's going to be a major question going forward. We also have quite a few zoning districts that basically zone for strip malls, to be blunt. We could probably consolidate that into 1 or 2. We then only have 1 district in the zoning ordinance that zones for what Mike was talking about, which is a little bit more walkable traditional town center. So our suggestion actually there is to break that into multiple different districts so we don't have to use the same district here in Fayette that we use in downtown Zionsville. Industrial, once again, there are quite a few districts. We think that can be consolidated. And then we have some of these special districts, et cetera. And these actually are probably pretty good to kind of continue as they are. With that, we'll be walking around the room. Paul, do you want me to introduce each activity we have? Or you want to do that? Or?
Yeah, I just, real quick, by show of hands, does anyone have any questions to ask that they'd like to ask to the whole group? Because we could do kind of an informal Q&A, although what we plan to do is a little bit of discussion. So raise your hand. Does anyone have a question that they'd like to ask that the group could benefit from? All right, I'm going to bring you the mic. Well, it's okay. And please say your name.
I'm Harold Vincent. My question is, my neighbor just had a garage built, and he had to go through both the Boone County zoning and the Zionsville zoning. Why do you have to go through two agencies to get a garage built? And by the way, when he went through Zionsville, it cost him $6,000 more.
Well, I can definitely say that fees are definitely designed to make sure that the whole community doesn't pay for everyone's individual site improvement, right? So everyone pays a fee when they have an improvement that has to be made, and that basically is designed to cover the cost of the services that are being delivered, so that everyone in the whole community doesn't pay for all of those improvements every time. Actually, Owen, I might ask you the Boone County thing. Can you answer that question?
Not only really context when it comes to rural zoning and structures being built. Typically, since we don't have drainage jurisdiction, you'd be going through Boone County through their drainage department to get a drainage permit. So they take a look at it and go, okay, you're sheet draining to X, Y, or Z. We're only going to charge you $75. Or hey, you're doing a little bit more intense. You're trying to get a little bit more lot coverage, etc. We're going to charge you a little bit more, possible additional storm improvements, etc. But you have that on top of the building review, which is what our current building department does. We've got planning, zoning, and building jurisdiction for that. So we also review the structure for integrity, many other things to make sure that it's structurally sound, so that it's not good for you as a current owner, but also owner, 2 owners, 5 owners down the road that's still standing. That's still a good structure.
So that makes sense. I'm going to summarize too. So essentially what Owen's saying is that the county does have jurisdiction over certain things like stormwater improvement, the right of way, and if you're making a certain type of improvement, the county would have authority to approve that thing. Drainage is a big one that is county approval. And then the town controls zoning and also the building review. So there's probably multiple approvals that your neighbor would have to get. And not all of them are related to zoning. I'm going to give an opportunity for others to ask questions. But if I'm not seeing everyone anxious to ask questions, we can also go into a little bit of a group discussion. Another question here.
I just had a question on how it gets funded. Oh, Alan Willis. Like Brownsburg basically rebuilt their whole downtown. I didn't know if that was developer funded and they're just taking the risk on themselves for finding tenants for both residential and business, or is this something that the city funds, or I guess if they were to develop something in this area?
So for the most part, the types of development that we're talking about controlling through zoning would be developer funded, right? And they would fund not only the approval processes and pay for those application fees, but they'd also fund development. There are a lot of economic development activities. I know Owen is the economic development director for Zionsville, and those types of programs are sometimes accessible to developers as well. Chris, you got a mic there. Do you want to talk a little bit about economic incentives?
Sure, and I'll just briefly. Everyone hear me? Is this working? Okay. There are a number of incentives to do certain things, and there's also help with things like infrastructure improvements. But I think the key thing to remember on all of this is that if there's going to be public investment in anything, it's going to flow from the public interest, right? And if a developer simply is coming to Perry Township and buying a 40-acre parcel and wanting to build houses, I'll correct me if I'm wrong, but usually that is completely on the developer. It's their risk, it's their cost, it's their investment, they reap profits, right? And the public control over that, or the public side of it, is what did we zone this for? And is what getting built what we want? And
That's why zoning is so important, because if you zone for what you want, what gets built is what you want. If you leave things up to the whims of a developer, you're going to get what a developer wants. So I think that's why this process is so crucial.
Right, I got a couple more questions. Hal, I'm going to go to the left first.
Yeah, my name is Bill Spitz, and I really like the walkable parts of your story here. In the towns, multiple town centers, is there any plans that those are connected by bicycle type thing, so you would actually have to take a car to get to a different town center? And just moving away from reliance on motor vehicles. And then I had a second question, which was, again, it's an energy related thing. Right now, there's certain homeowners associations that can't have solar panels on your house. And I was just wondering how that fits into what we're looking at.
So I'll reply quickly, and then if anyone else has any comments, please chime in or just let me know. On the bicycle connectivity, and also inline skating or equestrian trails, that type of development. For the most part, those are planning exercises, but they are influenced by zoning. And one of the things I said early on in the presentation is form-based codes may do these things, like it may control street types, but all of them don't. But often what you do get is requirements for pedestrian access, bicycle access, and specifically bike racks, where the doors are placed, where that access is placed. And if you, for instance, as we do in Perry Township and in Zionsville, we've got trails, we can also require access from those trails to the land uses. So I think there is an element of creating non-motorized connectivity that does extend to zoning, and is certainly within the scope of the types of design standards we would be looking at. Quickly, my colleague wants to say something too, but there was another part of that question, which was
It's about homeowners associations?
It was about solar panels.
solar panels. My one comment on that is that I wanted to make a distinction that there are many types of solar, including residential rooftop solar, which can be controlled by zoning. There's also solar panels, which can be placed in industrial areas, but you can control solar development through zoning as well. So we typically describe those as utility solar and residential or individual solar. Chris, do you want to comment on that?
There's generally that distinction in zoning. Solar panel on your roof versus your backyard versus it's the only use of the property. There's no house at all or business. But I also wanted to say with our homeowners associations, the homeowners associations can be more strict than zoning. They cannot be less strict than zoning, right? Which I suppose does then give the homeowners association the right to say you can or cannot do X, Y, or Z with your property. Zoning would otherwise allow you to do. So I would say that if there's a problem with your individual homeowners association, the person taking that over is the homeowners association themselves. I know a lot of them can be very restrictive.
That's a great point to bring up. And then Mike had a comment.
Yeah, as far as the preliminary locations for those con centers, that's one thing we didn't take into consideration yet, but we will, is make sure that they're either on bike routes or trails, or they're planned, those trails are planned, and we can adjust the locations if necessary.
And last but not least, I will just add over on the table behind you, we have a number of planning documents, and one of those is the Trails and Pathways Plan, which I believe is now about 7, 8, 9 years old. That will get updated at some point in the future as well. And so, the zoning will influence those future planning activities, which will influence zoning activities and so on and so forth. So it's kind of a cyclical thing.
Call that a virtuous loop or something like that. I had one back here first. I'll go back there.
Thank you, Tony Carroll. Just a couple of questions. I gathered from your presentation that
the purpose for us being here tonight is that you've identified these 4 town centers or hamlets, and you're wanting to get input as to what we think of that. So, number one, is that a correct assumption? And number two, how did you come up with what those 4 were? And then a second unrelated question is that I didn't see anything in your presentation about industrial, and Perry Zionsville is on the neighbor, we border a huge industrial area up here that appears to be encroaching more and more over into Perry Zionsville, and there wasn't anything in your presentation about that. So I'm curious as to why you chose not to talk about industrial.
Thank you. I would say we didn't choose not to talk about industrial, and it is definitely an issue. So if you came tonight to let us know a little bit about industrial encroaching and have some ideas that we should incorporate on, it's a listening session. So I would talk to one of us and let's get some notes on that, because we're definitely here to learn about the issues. I would also say we did some touring today. We did observe the industrial growth, and we talked a little bit today. And we did it was a general presentation, but we talked about the encroachment of urbanization onto traditionally agricultural areas and agricultural residential areas. Part of that encroachment is industrial encroachment. And the impacts of industrial certainly are different, and they're changing. The impacts we used to think of industrial as kind of the dirtiness, the fog, the noise, the smoke, the odors. Now it's a lot of the trucks, right? It's clean industrial, but it still impacts life. The other important thing of industrial is, since it is cleaner, it's also a big economic boom. So it can be very vital to the economy. So I think we want to understand from everyone tonight if there are things that we want to consider, both about the growth and importance of industrial, but also about the impacts of industrial on your community. We want to learn about what those are so we can help to code them. On the question of the centers, I think we're really looking for proof of concept. So as Mike said, where these are located is more of an intellectual exercise tonight. We could hear, we don't like this idea at all about having hamlets or town centers. Or we could hear, we like it, but we think it really isn't right in this spot. And what we really want to understand, and what we'd like to get some consensus on this evening, is the idea that growth is going to happen. And what we want to do is we want to direct it in a way that preserves the quality of life and character that the residents of this community want to protect and maintain. And the strategy that Mike laid out kind of in his presentation presented was, you can actually, in creation of hamlets, direct the housing to a smaller area by protecting more land and actually maintaining what is really an agricultural character. So that's the real thing, and we've had this discussion a lot, but if you drive through even Perry Township and you arrive here, you notice this hamlet, and it doesn't feel like you're in a city. It feels like you're in a rural area, because what happens with hamlets is they're just right there. You don't get this suburban sprawl on the edge of them. So what we want to do is help to create a code that permits those types of places to develop, so that your farmland is protected, and then you arrive on a place that is more matching the character and is rural, even though it has some of those service uses. Even industrial uses can occur and do occur in hamlets. Does anyone else want to make a comment on that? I kind of feel that Mike, did I do a good job?
Yeah, you did. Yes, how we
arrived.
How we arrived at the location we have, and that was based on existing rooftops. We like to put these new town centers in a location that they can be accessed by residents that are already living there. So you already have some of these really intense, large lot single family subdivisions. Sometimes there's a lot of them around a particular intersection, if we can get the town center close to that, then those people have sort of a place within reach, of their homes. They can walk or ride a bike. The other two considerations were being on one of the highways, so that there's a lot of traffic going by, because the retail component of a town center like that won't be able to survive if it doesn't have maybe 30,000 cars a day going by, and they're visible from that. And then the final thing was rail lines, which that's only looking way into the future because you don't have any transit on rail right now. But those rail lines, if they get converted to trails, that's a good thing. And the additional consideration we're going to add for this gentleman's comment is we're going to take a look at existing trails and planned trails and see if we can adjust locations based on those, because at least 3 seasons out of the year you can get people. A lot of people are going to be willing to, get around on their bikes.
And not to belabor Mike's point, I just want to point out I can get back here quickly enough. I just want to point out one thing. First of all, we use the language we propose. And so, when you think of a proposal, then it doesn't necessarily mean we're expecting a yes answer. It's more of putting it out for your consideration as one possible strategy for fueling the potential demand that's going to come in the future. The second thing I'll put out here is we go back to our 1878 map, and you look at the little dots and the little settlements that were scattered all across the county. It's the same pattern. Nothing different than what was there. In some places that don't exist any longer, but did in 1878, such as maybe Northfield, Roscoe. You see up on the very northern part of Worth, you see Ratsford, you see Holmes Station. These were all tiny little hamlets that were dotted throughout the agricultural landscape in that very pattern.
So I think this is an interesting question. So I'm also going to ask Chris, you made an interesting point, and I think this is a good tie-in to the zoning ordinance. You talked about how right now the zoning code essentially has only one district for this type of walkable urbanism. And in doing this idea about creating these hamlets or other town places, what we want to do is create some districts that might be more suitable to a smaller scale environment.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, and that's one thing we want to talk about tonight. I think if you look at the character of Perry Township as it is, you're largely a rural area. You've got some industrial coming in. And so I'd love to talk to you about that over at these maps over here when we're ready. And you have the hamlet of Fayette, right? So if we're going to kind of mentally for tonight push the rest of the town out of our minds and just look at Perry, those are the issues we need to discuss, and those are the things that zoning needs to do for you. That our analysis of existing zoning isn't necessarily doing that very well. Existing zoning here in the town, in the hamlet of Fayette, is a general business all the way through. There's homes, right, surrounded by agricultural with some industrial zoning further up the road popping in whenever someone wants to build an industrial building. That's what we got right now. Maybe there's some nuances I missed there, but basically, right? So the question is, what can we do better in that regard? And I think that's really what we want to discuss tonight.
All right, I saw one more question over here, so I'm going to go over here for a second. Pardon me, sir.
My name's Gary Artman. I wanted to make the gentleman aware, I don't know if you are, in the northern part of Union Township, there is proposed a solar farm. This area was targeted by the Indiana Utility Regulatory Commission to put in a solar farm. The landscape up there is rural for the most part. There are several homes now, but for the most part, it is open farmland. And there's a power line that runs through that property. It actually runs from Noblesville, from the power plant. And it has a substation near Noblesville, and it has a substation near Sheridan. And then on the west side of Zionsville, there's another substation. They can no longer generate enough power at that substation, at that power plant, to feed this area. So they have requested a solar farm be built in that area, in this location. I am one of the landowners that had signed a lease agreement with Next Era Energy. I just basically want to make you gentlemen aware this will be an elephant in the room at some point for you. And everyone has an opinion on this, and everyone's welcome to their opinion on this. But primarily, that's what I didn't know if you were aware.
I would say we are aware and we've done some talking about it. For the purpose of this conversation tonight, I would just say we're here to hear from residents. So if anyone has an opinion on solar farming, please write it down and put it on the big idea boards for us. I will tell you, we've dealt with creating utility zoning ordinances that respect design character. We've also worked in places that don't want it, and we understand how to create the use in a way that is respectful to the places that don't want that use as well. This is to say, I understand it's an elephant in the room. Well, we've certainly seen some of the signs that are opposed to solar around the town. And as I mentioned, there's lots of different types of solar. It is certainly a clean and newer form of power generation. Doesn't mean that it should go everywhere though. And we're here to hear from residents about what their wants and needs are with respect to that. And I hope that we do hear some stuff about it this week. I'm seeing some more questions. Let me do a little time check. How are we doing on time?
About an hour in.
All right, we're at 8:15. I want to preserve, we're scheduled to 9. I said I want to preserve at least 30 minutes for some informal discussions. And we can, I think, go later. I think the chief will let us stay a little later if we need to. But I do want to be respectful of all of your time. So I'm going to say, it seems like we're having some good Q&A here. Let's keep it going. But I'm going to cut it off in 15 if we are still going. But I saw some hands go up. So who was next? I didn't necessarily see an order. All right, I'm going to go to this gentleman because he's closer.
My name is Michael Hurd. I have two questions. I noticed on your board over there was ag and ag production. I didn't know what the differences were between those two, and when it happens, what the steps would be when something is rezoned, and how we would be aware of that, or how that would happen.
Thank you. Ag and ag production, Chris, do you recall?
Actually, I think that's an Owen question.
Owen, do you know the difference between ag and ag production?
In the comprehensive plan, I think.
Everyone's on the spot. All right, so this is what I would say. That's a great question. We do have the zoning ordinance here, so that's a good one for discussion. So let's tag that a little bit. I
can tell you that in the current zoning ordinance, there's an agricultural production zoning district that doesn't appear on the map. So that would be an option for someone to request a rezoning to if they wanted to. Although I think it would take some further look at the zoning ordinance, why landowner would want that versus the existing ag zoning. We'll look at Owen again.
So what we have discovered, and Chris talked about this, was there's a lot of redundancy. Because basically what happened when the townships were annexed and the town was expanded was all of the zoning districts were melded into one. So that means it could just be the difference. It could be the same district, but a result from carryover from other zoning ordinances. And what we're looking to do is basically find those redundancies, understand the purpose of the districts, and then create, one district that serves all those purposes, so it's a little bit easier to understand. Other questions? I thought I saw one here. All right.
Hi, my name is Reagan. To go back to the Hamlet situation, interesting. From an economic development standpoint, why would a business build in Fayette versus Brownsburg or Zionsville or Whitestown? We're 10 minutes from everything major, so why would they come here? I think it would be kind of a challenge.
There's definitely restrictions here.
Just in general, why would, what's the economic development viability here?
Well, I would say with zoning, I think one of the advantages are we want to be ahead of unplanned development, right? So one of the comments Chris made was essentially we have a commercial district that would permit strip malls, right?
That's true.
So any of the commercial area up here it could be developed by someone who saw an economic incentive in a way that you might not want. And it could be a big change in character from this community. Well, right, and you've got lots of traffic. Actually, Adam mentioned that there's, to me earlier when we were talking, there's actually a plan on the books that has a 4-lane road out here. And that people use this road to cut a section of 65 down to 74. And this is not a bad thing, right? And I'm not an alarmist, right? And I'm not saying, oh, you're going to get a strip mall. You probably won't. But what we do want is if someone is looking to develop in this area, we want it to be in a manner that would that residents would like, that would suit the precedents and the sensibility that you want to see in this part of the town. And when we talk about form-based development, I think the advantage of using this type of model is that what you can do by creating standards is you can, and I mentioned this when I was talking, create incentives to develop in the manner you want. And then you can have a relatively easy approval process. So if we can get a good amount of consensus about the form of development, then everyone can feel confident if a developer comes in that they will be required to do the things that you want them to do. That's the advantage of zoning, right? You get what you zone for. That's a phrase we say a lot. So the development that comes in will be required to comply with the zoning ordinance. In some ways, that can be a disincentive for, say, I always pick on McDonald's, right? I like McDonald's. I eat at McDonald's. It might not be the form and character that I want in my community. It definitely wouldn't be something I would recommend for here. Just by requiring a form-based type of development, you can disincentivize a business that otherwise is a commercial restaurant and perfectly acceptable. Everybody likes to eat. But if they require a branded development form, they might not choose this as a location if we create a code that's designed around the sensibilities this community wants. Does that make sense? And I would say it's not necessarily that there is right now an economic incentive to jump or skip the urban form or the urban encroachment that's happening in other areas. But we know that it expands. I mean, development happens. And I did say this in my presentation too. If you like the community you live in, if you like this place, the worst thing you can do is nothing. Because then the development will come before you've even thought about it. And you'll be fighting it. What we have an opportunity is to get in advance of it and decide what types of developments this community wants and to try and code it. That's what we're trying to do. I saw one over here. If that was a good answer, I'm going to go over.
I'm Sherry Mitchell, and we live in a rural area, and we've already experienced, we've done some improvements on our property, so we already worked through zoning, and we already feel that it's somewhat more restrictive than it needs to be in the area that we live. And my concern is all the districting, and if you're going to district the rural area, including these potential sites, that might even create more constraints in an area that we already feel is already a little too restrictive.
Would you be up for giving some examples of the types of restrictions?
Sure. So we moved in about a year ago, and we have 8 acres. The entire back property is like 4 acres. Wanted to build a horse barn. And we wanted a specific size, and they said, well, it's too big because your accessory structures will exceed your home. And an accessory structure is defined as an attached garage, a covered porch, and that just doesn't make sense to me. Why would an accessory structure be your attached garage? And that would be counting against you building another structure on your property.
Okay. I think I understand. At least I have a response, and if you need more details, let me know. So actually, this is one of the things that we do confront in zoning a lot, right? And it's that most people's interaction with zoning is what they can do on their residential property, right? And often it's the lot size, lot coverage, the number of accessory buildings, where you can park an RV, These types of things are controlled by zoning, and you can control community character through zoning. I think what we find is that there are a lot of zoning codes that are designed to create for lack of a better word, a suburban character.
Well, to treat these folks in their agricultural property, their 8 acres, in a similar manner to how someone in this gentleman's neighborhood, right, over in the Eagle area, right? You're treating, and honestly, these guys can make a face at me if I'm wrong, because I could be wrong with this. But if the code is treating him and you the same with regard to his shed and your horse barn, we need to change that. You've got 8 acres, and we hear your feedback, and I think this is the kind of thing we can get into, because you can treat an agricultural zoning district lot different than a residential zoning district lot when it comes to sheds and things like that.
And we find even in places that are more uniform that just modern sensibilities are a little different. People want a little bit of a bigger garage. They want a garage they can, for instance, park their RV. They might
Usually in many zoning ordinances, an attached garage helps you because it increases the footprint of your house, and therefore, so these things are things we can work through. You guys may have identified an unintentional inconsistency where the ordinance says attached garage is not part of the footprint of your home, and then somewhere else it says you can't have accessory structures larger than the footprint of your home, and you just got penalized because the two different things that weren't actually work together, but once they got put together, now they get something different. So this is the type of review that we're kind of ongoing with this ordinance. This feedback is so important because sometimes you don't see this stuff until you see it. Right. So,
one of the things we do as part of our analysis is we look at variance decisions. So we try to see, in the case of residential zoning, how many variances based on structure size or number of accessory buildings are granted. And then we ask the question, would this be better, a better text amendment? Should we just permit this type of thing rather than making a variance? So I would say anyone else who has a question like that about the types of things they've gone through when they try to put an outbuilding or something like that on their lot, or if you have a comment, an issue that you came to tell us about tonight, you told us about it, so we know. But I'd say still write it down. That's why we have so many Post-it notes, and it helps because what we'll do is we will photograph all these Post-it notes, we will share them with the town. The feedback that you provide tonight will form the basis of the issues that we identify and try to fix as we go through the night. And those types of residential zoning questions are entirely within our scope. So we'll look at it in more detail. Thank you for raising it. I appreciate that. Gentlemen.
You've shown us the planning process and development process for what you're doing. Do you have a timeline that goes with that? And second, do you have a means we've been talking about communication, maybe email or forms to be submitted, something of that nature that you're going to follow up with and help really communicate with you?
Yes. Sorry, I heard the end of that. But Bill was asking about follow-up and ways to continue to follow the process. We do have a website that we put up. It's ZionsvilletownCode.com. And on that, there is an open comment form too. So if you even want to duplicate what you write down in person tonight, by going to ZionsvilletownCode.com, on the homepage, there's a button to press, and it's just a comment box where you can write a comment. Every comment submitted through that website will be documented as part of this process. We are also, we have the schedules up on there, and as we complete more parts of the process, we'll continue to put up more content there so you can follow the results of this and follow the shred this week on ZionsvilleTownCode.com. As far as the total process, we proposed a 12-month process. I think we're a little delayed on that because of what we've experienced in the pandemic. Initially, I think we were planning to do this event in April, and it's now the fall. So I think that roughly within the next 9 months to 12 months, we'll be looking to bring the draft code for adoption. So is that a good answer? Yes.
Wasn't exactly what I was expecting, but.
All right, well, there you go. And we can talk a little bit more, and I can help you figure out how to continue. Were there more questions? Thank you.
Hi, my name's Beck Robinson. I have a couple of questions. Do you have a push method, not just a poll? That would be helpful. Like if you have a distribution list, you can sign up for that would be helpful. The other is that Perry Township is fairly large, but is governed by Lebanon, Whitestown, and Zionsville. And I think your scope is only the Zionsville portion. Is that correct?
No.
No?
It's the entire.
The entire township of Perry Township?
The entire town is on.
Okay. Yes. All right. So there are two major concerns. I think there'll be big drivers that are not within Zionsville. One is the Ronald Reagan Parkway that's coming through, and the other one is obviously the industrial. That is a big driver and concern. I just want to mention that.
And if I might just clarify, it is just the portion of Perry Township that is under the town of Zionsville zoning jurisdiction, just to make sure that we're completely clear on this. So yes, there are other areas within Perry Township on the map that are in the zoning jurisdiction.
Thank you, Adam. I think I misunderstood the question.
This map
Yeah.
shows the area of Perry Township covered by Zionsville. I don't know if that was helpful or not.
And then the other part of the comment was a push method. So basically, I think we can very easily add an email submittal to our website so people can go and put their emails in that. And if you signed in tonight, we can go ahead and also add you to that follow-up list. All right, were there other questions? We've got one over here. I'm going to go behind. Thank you.
Tony Mitchell, just a quick question. Why are we connected with Zionsville?
Oh, boy.
That's a real quick one. Adam, can I ask you to field that? You gave the historical,
Sure, the best question of all, why are we here? So over the last 20 years, there's been a process of governmental cooperation and consolidation. And so Zionsville, the village, which is over, Brick Main Street in that area, slowly starting in about the 1970s, began annexing portions of Eagle Township that surrounded it. At the same time, out here we've got Perry, and to the north we've got Union. And it was in 2010, I believe, that everything was buttoned up, that there was a agreement of intergovernmental cooperation that took into account this portion of Perry Township, not all of Perry, but this portion of it, as well as the remainder of Union Township and the remainder of Eagle Township as an alternative to what would have otherwise probably continued to happen, which is the village, or the town, of Zionsville itself, continuing to annex small portions of outlying area. And you've seen this in other jurisdictions, right, in central Indiana. So you're seeing this in Carmel, you're seeing this in Westfield, where they're combined and cooperating with their planning jurisdictions.
and I would say in the district consolidation that Chris presented, right, there's probably a lot of commonality in what we can do by consolidating the rules, based more on place and the types of places that exist in this region than necessarily just what the zoning was, right? So that's why we have, how many districts? 30 districts? There's so many districts. It's not because they're actually different. It's just because we merged prior rules into one big arching rule. So I think if we accomplish one thing in this process, it would be reducing redundancy so that the rules actually make sense, they're easy to follow, and not even changed, right? We do want to fix things like the accessory building issue. We want to make those types of improvements that are aligned with people's desires and expectations for development. But we don't necessarily need two different rules for that just because historically there were two zoning codes. Does that make sense? I'm going to take one more question. This will be the last.
Comment.
Okay, we got a comment here.
I don't know if you're all aware of the court battle we had with Whitestown. Whitestown wanted to annex us and put us under their ordinances, whereas the Perry Township Board united with the Zionsville town and annexed us as a rural district instead. We had to go to court to fight that. It got appealed. We lost that one. Then we took it to the state Supreme Appeal Court and won that one. And that's why we are now in Zionsville to prevent Whitestown from annexing us at the time, because we would have been subject to all their town ordinances as part of the town rather than the rural district. And that's why we did this, so we could be part of this rural district.
Thank you for the comment. And we do understand that. And I would also say that your comment very much aligns with my comment, right? Which is, what we want to do is we want to understand what that really means. What are the codes that were preserved when that decision happened, so that we can preserve and apply those moving forward. But now is the time when we're also looking to simplify that regulatory form, so we can understand what those districts really mean, what the town was trying to preserve when that decision was made, so that essentially the regulation can move forward in a manner that is desirable for the residents. Does that make sense? All right, I said that was going to be the last one, and we do want to have some informal chatting. I think that was a great Q&A. I'm glad we did it. Hopefully everyone enjoyed it. Thank you. And let's have a discussion. Thank you very much.